On the morning of February 11th, 1940, at precisely 0625 hours, Corporal Mikko Laaksonen crouched behind a snow-covered log barricade in the forests of Karelia, gripping a weapon that represented Finnish engineering's response to the tactical reality of fighting vastly superior Soviet forces in winter conditions. The Suomi KP/31 submachine gun in his hands was already recognized as one of the finest submachine guns in the world, manufactured to precision tolerances that created exceptional reliability, firing the 9x19mm Parabellum cartridge at a cyclic rate of approximately 900 rounds per minute, and featuring a design that maintained functionality in extreme cold that rendered many other automatic weapons inoperative. What transformed Laaksonen's particular Suomi from merely excellent to tactically revolutionary was the massive 71-round drum magazine mounted beneath the receiver, a circular magazine measuring approximately 23 centimeters in diameter that provided sustained fire capability exceeding anything that contemporary submachine guns could achieve. The drum magazine's development had been driven by Finnish tactical doctrine's emphasis on defensive operations where small numbers of well-positioned Finnish soldiers would need to deliver overwhelming firepower against attacking Soviet forces that enjoyed massive numerical superiority. At 31 years of age, Laaksonen had served with the Finnish army for 4 months since mobilization in September 1939, and he had carried the Suomi through engagements during December and January that had taught him both the weapon's exceptional capabilities and the specific tactical advantages that the 71-round drum magazine provided over the standard 20-round or 36-round box magazines that other submachine guns employed. He had trained on the Suomi during October 1939 at a depot near Viipuri, where instructors had emphasized the weapon's revolutionary manufacturing quality, its resistance to cold weather malfunctions, and the sustained fire capability that the drum magazine provided during defensive operations against attacking Soviet forces. The Suomi KP/31 submachine gun had been developed during the early 1920s by Finnish designer Aimo Lahti, entering service with the Finnish military in 1931, hence the designation KP/31 for Konepistoli submachine gun model 1931. The weapon's design incorporated several features that distinguished it from contemporary submachine guns. The Suomi utilized exceptional manufacturing tolerances compared to weapons like the Soviet PPSH-41 or the later British Sten, with precisely machined components and careful assembly creating reliability that functioned even in extreme cold, where lesser weapons failed due to ice accumulation, lubricant freezing, or dimensional changes from thermal contraction. The weapon's barrel was manufactured to rifle standards rather than the simpler production methods that many submachine gun manufacturers employed, creating accuracy that approached rifle performance at ranges where most submachine guns were considered effective only for suppressive fire. The Suomi's effective range extended to approximately 300 meters when fired by skilled operators using semi-automatic mode, compared to the 100 to 150 meter effective range typical of simpler submachine gun designs. This extended range capability made the Suomi more versatile than pure close-quarters weapons, allowing Finnish soldiers to engage Soviet forces at distances where Soviet submachine guns could not effectively return fire. However, the Suomi's most revolutionary feature was its magazine system, specifically the 71-round drum magazine that Finnish designers had developed to provide sustained fire capability exceeding anything that contemporary submachine guns could achieve. The drum magazine's development had been driven by Finnish tactical doctrine's emphasis on defensive operations where small numbers of well-positioned Finnish soldiers would need to deliver overwhelming firepower against attacking Soviet forces that enjoyed massive numerical superiority. The 71-round drum magazine measured approximately 23 centimeters in diameter and 7 centimeters in height, creating a circular magazine substantially larger than the drum magazines employed on weapons like the Thompson submachine gun, which typically held 50 rounds. The magazine's internal mechanism utilized a spiral track that positioned cartridges progressively from the drum's outer edge toward the center, with a clock spring providing the mechanical force to advance cartridges through the track toward the feed mechanism. The magazine's capacity of 71 rounds was not arbitrary. Finnish designers had calculated that this capacity would provide approximately 7 to 8 seconds of continuous fire at the Suomi's 900 rounds per minute cyclic rate, a duration that tactical analysis suggested was optimal for defensive fire against infantry assault waves. 8 seconds of continuous fire allowed a single Suomi gunner to engage multiple targets during a single magazine before reloading. Multiple Suomi gunners positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire could create zones where Soviet infantry suffered catastrophic casualties during advances across open ground or through forest terrain where cover was limited. The magazine's weight when fully loaded was approximately 2.8 kilograms, nearly 3 times the weight of a loaded 20-round box magazine. This substantial weight created handling complications, as the magazine mounted beneath the receiver meant that the weapon's center of gravity shifted downward and forward when the drum was installed. The weight distribution affected aim and made rapid target acquisition more difficult compared to box magazine configurations where weight was distributed more centrally. The magazine's physical size created additional complications. The 23-centimeter diameter extended below the receiver far enough that prone firing positions required the operator to elevate the weapon to prevent the magazine from contacting the ground, similar to the complications that side-mounted magazines created for weapons like the Sten Mark I. The magazine's bulk also made weapon manipulation more awkward during movement through dense forest vegetation where branches and undergrowth could catch on the protruding drum. However, these handling complications were considered acceptable trade-offs for the sustained fire capability that the drum magazine provided during the defensive operations that dominated Finnish tactical employment during the Winter War. Finnish defensive doctrine emphasized establishing fortified positions with interlocking fields of fire, allowing Soviet forces to advance into kill zones where Finnish automatic weapons could deliver devastating fire at close range before Soviet numerical superiority could be brought to bear effectively. The tactical scenario that characterized much of the Winter War fighting involved Soviet forces attacking prepared Finnish positions in attempts to break through defensive lines and advance toward strategic objectives. Soviet tactical doctrine emphasized mass infantry assaults supported by artillery preparation, with attacking forces accepting heavy casualties in exchange for overwhelming defensive positions through sheer numbers. Finnish defensive success depended on delivering sufficient firepower to inflict casualties that Soviet forces could not sustain, creating such severe losses that attacks collapsed despite the Soviet numerical advantage. The Suomi, with its 71-round drum magazine, represented Finnish engineering's contribution to this defensive strategy. A single Suomi gunner positioned in a prepared defensive position could deliver 8 seconds of continuous automatic fire, engaging multiple Soviet soldiers during a single magazine before reloading. Multiple Suomi gunners positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire could create zones where Soviet infantry suffered catastrophic casualties during advances across open ground or through forest terrain where cover was limited. Laaksonen had received his Suomi equipped with both drum magazines and box magazines during his initial training in October 1939. The training had included extensive live-fire exercises that familiarized soldiers with the drum magazine's characteristics, the weight affecting aim, the size creating clearance issues, the loading procedure requiring attention to ensure proper cartridge positioning in the spiral track, and the magazine change procedure that differed from the simpler box magazine replacement that other submachine guns employed. The drum magazine loading process required approximately 2 to 3 minutes to complete properly, significantly longer than the 10 to 15 seconds required to load a 20-round box magazine. The soldier had to insert cartridges individually into the feed mechanism, rotating the drum progressively as each cartridge was loaded to advance the spiral track and position the next loading point. Improper loading could cause feeding failures, with cartridges jamming in the track or failing to advance properly during firing. The loading time meant that drum magazines were typically loaded well before engagement, during preparation phases when time pressure was minimal. The magazine change procedure was straightforward but slower than box magazine changes due to the drum's weight and size. The soldier had to release the magazine catch, support the heavy drum as it disengaged from the receiver to prevent it from dropping and potentially being damaged, set the empty drum aside, retrieve a loaded replacement, align it with the receiver's magazine well, and seat it firmly until the catch engaged. The entire procedure consumed approximately 8 to 10 seconds when performed by experienced soldiers under stress, substantially longer than the 3 to 4 seconds typical of box magazine changes, but still acceptable given the extended firing duration that the drum provided before requiring replacement. The engagement on February 11, 1940, began when Soviet forces launched an attack against Laaksonen's defensive sector following an artillery preparation that had lasted approximately 20 minutes. The Soviet forces, approximately company strength based on the number of soldiers Laaksonen could observe advancing through the forest, moved forward in dispersed formations designed to minimize casualties from Finnish defensive fire. However, the forest terrain and snow conditions limited how dispersed the Soviet forces could become while maintaining unit cohesion, creating target concentrations that Finnish defensive fire could engage effectively. Laaksonen's position was situated to provide flanking fire across the Soviet approach route, positioned approximately 80 meters from the expected Soviet advance path and concealed behind snow-covered logs and natural terrain features that provided protection while allowing adequate fields of fire. His section commander had positioned 3 Suomi gunners to create overlapping fields of fire across the kill zone, with riflemen positioned to engage Soviet soldiers at longer ranges before they entered the area where submachine gun fire would be most effective. The Soviet advance reached the kill zone at approximately 06:35 hours, with the lead elements entering the area where Laaksonen's field of fire could engage them effectively. Laaksonen observed approximately 15 to 20 Soviet soldiers within his engagement area, moving through the forest in small groups while attempting to maintain cover using trees and terrain features. The range was approximately 60 to 70 meters, optimal for the Suomi's capabilities, and close enough that the high rate of fire would create devastating effects against soldiers who had limited protection. Laaksonen set his Suomi's selector to full automatic, settled the weapon against his shoulder with the heavy drum magazine supported by his left hand, aimed at the lead Soviet group, and pressed the trigger. The Suomi roared to life with its characteristic high-pitched report, the 900 rounds per minute cyclic rate creating a sound distinctly different from slower-firing submachine guns. Laaksonen fired in a sustained burst of approximately 20 rounds, the high rate of fire allowing him to engage multiple Soviet soldiers during the 2-second burst as he traversed the weapon across the target group. The 9mm rounds struck multiple Soviet soldiers, creating casualties and forcing others to take cover behind trees or drop prone in the snow. Laaksonen shifted his aim to a second Soviet group, approximately 10 meters distant from the first, and fired another sustained burst of approximately 15 rounds, again engaging multiple targets during the brief firing period. The Suomi's high rate of fire meant that Laaksonen could deliver devastating volumes of fire against concentrated targets, creating effects that slower-firing weapons could not match. Laaksonen continued engaging Soviet forces for approximately 6 seconds of cumulative firing time, delivering approximately 60 rounds in multiple bursts against various target groups across his engagement area. The drum magazine's capacity allowed him to maintain continuous engagement without pausing to change magazines, shifting rapidly between targets as Soviet soldiers attempted to advance or establish firing positions. The psychological effect of the continuous automatic fire was substantial. Soviet soldiers faced unrelenting fire that gave them no opportunity to advance during a lull while the Finnish gunner reloaded. After approximately 60 rounds expended, Laaksonen paused firing to assess the tactical situation and to allow his barrel to cool slightly. The Suomi's high manufacturing quality meant that barrel overheating was less severe than with cruder submachine guns, but sustained automatic fire still generated heat that could affect accuracy and reliability if allowed to become excessive. The pause also allowed Laaksonen to observe that Soviet forces had taken cover and that their advance had halted under the combined fire from his position and adjacent Finnish positions. The engagement resumed when Soviet forces attempted to resume their advance approximately 1 minute later. Laaksonen expended the remaining rounds in his drum magazine, approximately 10 to 15 rounds, engaging Soviet soldiers who were attempting to move forward under covering fire from their comrades. The final bursts exhausted the 71-round drum magazine, having provided approximately 7 to 8 seconds of cumulative firing time across multiple engagement periods. The magazine change consumed approximately 9 seconds. Laaksonen released the magazine catch, supported the heavy, empty drum as it disengaged, set it aside in the snow beside his position, retrieved a loaded replacement drum from his equipment, aligned it with the magazine well, and seated it firmly until the catch engaged. During those 9 seconds, adjacent Finnish positions maintained fire, ensuring continuous suppression of Soviet forces while Laaksonen was unable to engage. The engagement continued for another 12 minutes, with Laaksonen expending 2 additional 71-round drum magazines and approximately 40 rounds from a box magazine during the later phases when Soviet forces had largely withdrawn and remaining targets were dispersed individuals rather than concentrated groups. The Finnish defensive fire had inflicted casualties that Soviet commanders assessed as unsustainable, and the Soviet forces withdrew to their starting positions without achieving their objective of penetrating the Finnish defensive line. The after-action assessment that Laaksonen's section commander conducted following the engagement documented the 71-round drum magazine's effectiveness during defensive operations. The sustained fire capability had allowed Suomi gunners to maintain continuous engagement during critical phases when Soviet forces were concentrated and vulnerable, creating casualties and psychological effects that contributed to the attack's failure. The magazine capacity had reduced the number of magazine changes required during the engagement compared to what would have been necessary with box magazines, allowing Finnish gunners to maintain more consistent fire. However, the assessment also noted the drum magazine's limitations. The weight had affected aim precision, requiring greater physical effort to maintain stable weapon position during sustained firing. The size had created handling difficulties when Laaksonen had attempted to shift his firing position slightly during the engagement, with the magazine catching on the log barricade and requiring careful maneuvering. The magazine change time, while acceptable, was substantially longer than box magazine changes and represented periods when the gunner could not engage targets. The broader Finnish experience with the 71-round drum magazine during the Winter War mirrored these observations. The drum magazine proved exceptionally valuable during defensive operations where Finnish forces occupied prepared positions and engaged attacking Soviet forces at close range. The sustained fire capability created tactical effects that box magazines could not match, allowing individual Finnish soldiers to deliver firepower that seemed to come from multiple weapons. Soviet forces facing Finnish Suomi fire frequently reported that they were engaged by much larger forces than actually opposed them, as the sustained automatic fire created impressions of greater Finnish strength than reality. However, the drum magazine proved less valuable during mobile operations or during Finnish counterattacks where rapid movement and frequent position changes were required. The weight and bulk made the weapon more fatiguing to carry during movement, and the handling complications made rapid target engagement more difficult. Finnish soldiers conducting offensive operations frequently preferred box magazines that provided less sustained fire capability but better handling characteristics for mobile warfare. The Finnish military's approach to magazine selection reflected this understanding. Soldiers were issued both drum magazines and box magazines, with tactical circumstances determining which configuration was optimal. Defensive operations from prepared positions generally favored drum magazines for their sustained fire capability. Mobile operations, patrols, and counterattacks generally favored box magazines for their superior handling characteristics. The Suomi's ability to accept both magazine types without modification allowed Finnish soldiers to adapt their weapons to tactical requirements rather than accepting a single configuration optimized for only one type of operation. The technical achievement that the 71-round drum magazine represented should not be understated. Creating a magazine of this capacity that functioned reliably required sophisticated engineering and precision manufacturing. The spiral track had to be machined to tolerances that ensured smooth cartridge advancement without jamming. The clock spring had to provide consistent force throughout the magazine's capacity without weakening prematurely. The magazine body had to be strong enough to withstand combat handling while remaining light enough that the loaded weight did not become prohibitively burdensome. The Finnish achievement in creating this magazine was particularly remarkable given Finland's limited industrial capacity compared to major powers. The precision manufacturing required for both the Suomi itself and its drum magazines represented capabilities that many nations with far greater resources struggled to achieve.